Frank from Infinite Red made that just during lunch, I think.
Yeah.
Freaking awesome.
So let's give it
That's
up
the
for
kind of
Infinite
support we
Red
get
for
here.
hosting us. Yeah. Cool. My name is Thomas Bruchetta.
And I'm Kyle Poole.
And we're going to be talking about gestures. We both work together at an agency here in Portland called Instrument. And the reason there's some oohs. The reason there's two of us up here is because Kyle is incredibly handsome and I'm incredibly funny. So we figured we'd combine the two of those to create a talk that was both easy on your eyes and enjoyable for your ears, at the very least.
I did not write that intro, I promise you.
To know a little bit about myself, again, my name's Thomas, and my real interest in development and web development specifically is in storytelling. This started at a really early age with Choose Your Own Adventure novels, for anybody who's familiar with them. And what I really liked about those was content was created by an author, and you, the user, got to decide how you would navigate through that adventure and really feel like you were in control of the journey. And we're really hoping that today's talk about gestures will help you and your users really experience digital experiences in this way, where the user is the one who ultimately makes the choices, even if they weren't the one who generated the content.
Yeah, and I'm Kyle. I go by Kilpo, as you can see online, and I am a web and native developer. Been using React for almost 4 years now, and React Native for almost 2 years, so I'm definitely a fanboy, for sure. I also really enjoy obsessing about the little details, and this goes all over the place, but I enjoy the little details of the timing and the type of motion in a transition. I enjoy optimizing the user flow if we're trying to take them A to B, and also my own personal flow, and probably I spend a little too much time on that, as Thomas can attest to. But I also really enjoy going down the rabbit hole. If I wake up in the morning with a question and I end the day with 20 browser tabs with seemingly unrelated content, that's kind of a victory for me. I just enjoy it. I like geeking out about that stuff. So yeah, we basically live and work together in this place for 40 hours a week. This is Instrument, and we are here in Portland. I have no idea if that's northeast or that's northeast. We are northeast across the river. Thank you, Thomas. In this nice building here, we just moved in somewhat recently, and it's super fancy and designery and a nice big open creative space without voice cracks. And if you want to check it out, please let us know. It's a cool little spot. So I tried to memorize this and I really couldn't, so I'm just going to read it really fast. We're a digital brand and product innovation company in Portland, Oregon. We're strategists, designers, developers, writers, directors, and producers united by a pioneering spirit. All that to say, we get to work with some really talented people that are meticulous. They are really proud of their craft, building really aesthetic, beautiful, great user experiences along the way. And we get to work for some really inspiring companies. These are some of them. There are more. We can't necessarily say exactly what we do, but it's a great setup for us. Thomas, take it away with storytelling.
Yeah, so a large part of what we do, Kyle and I specifically at Instrument, is we build prototypes. We help companies dream about the next state of their application. And we've been using React Native for the last 1.5 years to do that. And so along that journey, we really feel that we've become what we call gesture wizards. And I want to tell you how we became gesture wizards, as we call it. Really a lot of practice. We've been doing this, like I said, exclusively, full-time job, plus nights and weekends, working in React Native. But more so, what our clients look to for us a lot is to create really immersive experiences. And with immersive experiences, they want products featured, they want their content featured, they don't want experiences that are cluttered by a lot of UI. And so gestures are a way to really simplify and streamline the user experience such that content can be front and center at the focus. A lot of times, too, gestures end up getting connected to animations. And one of the things Instrument prides itself on is creating really fluid, natural, beautiful animations that are connected to those gestures. So we've had to work a lot with gestures and with the events that they emit.
Yeah, and the word we hear so frequently is butter from our designers. It has to be buttery smooth, butter, butter, butter. So many of our pull requests just say butter. It's just ridiculous.
Yeah, literally tickets that are just like, add the butter.
Yep.
So a little bit of an overview of what we're going to be covering. We're going to be talking about what are gestures and why do you care, and more so why we think they are truly magical. Some basic and advanced gestures within the React Native ecosystem. And then this is a mantra at Instrument, which is to make the complex simple. Really, really good ideas and really well executed digital experiences should ultimately be very simple, not just for the end user, but for the developers. So we're going to talk about how we've made something that can be rather complex, to be quite frank, which are gestures, simple, streamlined, and easy to use. So here we have a few examples of gestures, quite a few actually. But this is by no means an exhaustive list. These are some common gestures: tap, double tap, pinch, flick, rotate. And you'll notice these are all touch gestures. Gestures are not strictly for touch interfaces. That's how we talk about them a lot. Obviously, this is a React Native conference, and we're going to be talking about touch gestures because they've really changed a lot of the ways that we build UIs. So what do we mean when we say gestures are magical? Well, what we mostly mean is that they create simpler UIs. And what I mean by simpler UIs are UIs that involve fewer clicks, fewer buttons, less clutter on the page. And a really good example of this is Inbox, or whatever version of Inbox you have, where previously there was a button to select it, there was a button to, then you then pressed again to select the item, and then you probably found some sort of delete icon to delete it. This has all been replaced, right, with a simple swipe to the left, which opens up 3 other options, and then a further swipe left to actually get rid of an inbox item, which is much easier for the user and also involves fewer steps.
Less taps.
Less taps, less clutter. And then, you know, the other unique thing about gestures is they create this really intimate connection between content that's really different. Again, my background's in web development. And as we all know, the web was originally made to be a place to view documents, to read long amounts of text. And the native space has created an expectation for users where content is directly manipulated and interacted with. It's something that has a textural component to it. And so that brings me to my last point, which is that gestures truly are magic, because whenever you think about magic, you think about somebody waving their fingers and matter magically changes. That's exactly what we just said a gesture is, right? You wave your fingers and something happens. So we truly believe in the truest sense of the word that gestures are magical. To further illustrate the simplification of a UI via gestures, Google Maps is a great example. We're looking at Google Maps circa, I don't know, early 2000s, where on the left-hand side you can see a really involved UI with up, down, left, right arrows, a little icon for zooming in and out, all of these by really predefined increments. And then we can see where Google Maps is today, where gestures has removed that entire left UI. And aside from just decluttering the interface, gestures give you a lot more control, right? Rather than zooming in by however many pixels at a time, you now can zoom in on a nearly infinite gradient of precision, and same with pan, which is not only functional and easy to use, but it also creates a greater sense of exploration as a user. You're not needing to like interact with this left-hand side to do something in the center of the screen. You're directly manipulating the thing that you're looking at. So hopefully this has enticed you that gestures are something that can really simplify and create a magical experience for users. And the next question that you're wondering is, sweet, how do I become a gesture wizard? And we're hopefully going to give you the tools needed to start your spell book of gesture magic.
Should have worn robes. Should have worn robes.
Yeah, we could have done better with costumes. So we've been talking about magic. We've been talking about wizards now, and you're probably wondering, what the heck? Are these guys just super nerds? What's the deal? So one really practical reason we're going to be talking about wizards and magic is because a lot of what we work on for our clients is under NDAs, and we just can't show you a lot of the cool stuff we've built. So we had to put it all under the guise of wizard magic. But a more practical reason is that wizards, like I said earlier, are people who often, to cast a spell, say something and then make a gesture, and that gesture results in a desired change in their environment. And that's exactly, we thought, a perfect tie-in for what we're going to be showing you and creating examples of. And then lastly, just, you know, fair disclosure, we really like wizards. So we get to do what we want. We're here. Cool. So what we're going to be building and using to illustrate a few examples of gestures is we're going to be creating a store that does not yet exist, but maybe one day will, where wizards can go online to buy all the tools that they need to be a really good wizard. More specifically, we're going to be making a product detail page for this Grandmaster Oak Staff, 270 gold steel. And we're going to be talking about how gestures can make this experience really magical. Cool. So first, we're going to talk about a suite of components that come with React Native, which are the touchable components. These include tap, double tap, long press, are some common uses. And there are 4 React Native components that allow you to do these kind of gestures. We're going to talk about 3 of them because the 4th one's specific to Android, and I don't want to get into it. So, so the first one is touchable without feedback. This is kind of the simplest, most bare bone interaction that a user can have with a press event. The main sort of action of this component is the onPress. And onPress simply allows you to pass in a callback function which will be executed when the user releases the press event. You can also see that we've added some hit slop here. For those of you who aren't familiar, this is simply a way to wrap something that's touchable with a larger touchable area that doesn't affect layout, which is really cool, especially if you came from the web and you're used to adding a bunch of padding and hoping that that padding doesn't mess up your layout to get something to be bigger and tappable for fat thumbs like mine. So our demo here, we can see you click add to chest, poof, it's added to your chest of items. One thing to note though is that there's no feedback, right? The button doesn't change when you press it. We see the callback fired, but the user doesn't really know, did I click the button? Didn't I? It's not really clear. So luckily React Native also ships with a tool that can make it more explicit, give the user some feedback. In this case, give the wizard some feedback about what they're about to do before they do it. For those from a web background, you're used to hover states, right? This was an easy tool when you have a mouse to show what's underneath a navigation item, that you're over a button that might be clicked to take you to do something, especially in a commerce situation. You don't want people accidentally buying things. Touchable opacity is very simple. You wrap it around whatever component. In our case, we have a view with some text in it that forms a button. And touchable opacity will simply lower the opacity of that component on press in, and then fire the callback on press out when you release the press. And we can see an example of that here. When you press in, the opacity is lightened, and then the callback is fired on release. This is a really good solve. It's an easy solve too, because you just wrap it around virtually anything that's touchable, and now you have an active state. The user gets to make a choice. If the user presses in and then moves away from the button, it will not fire the callback, which is a nicety. But you might have some designers who are saying, well, this is a white button on a white background. That's a little bit hard to see, and you kind of just obliterated my nicely designed button. And they might want a little bit more bespoke of an experience, which is where touchable highlight comes in. This allows you to specify an underlay color so that when the button is pressed, you can have a color that's within the palette of perhaps your application. I don't end up using this one too often. Touchable opacity usually works pretty well for us, and we used a little bit of a garish example in the last slide to make sure you could see it with the projector. But with touchable highlight, we can see that the active state, we've set a background color of green to match the green add to cart button. I don't think this looks notably beautiful, but that's why
it was light green and it didn't go through.
That's true. We picked a very classy
It was
green.
nice before, yeah.
But we're forced to use this one. Cool. So after I just said that we're trying to move away from all these taps, I just showed you 3 examples of taps, and you're like, WTF. So now we're going to move on to some gestures that aren't taps that allow a more rich experience. The first one you might be thinking, well, this is really simple. I've seen this in the web. This is like the most basic thing. Websites do this naturally. But scroll view for React Native is actually much more powerful than just scrolling. There's a lot you can do with it. Including dragging, flicking, pinching, and even has the ability to zoom. I'm going to be covering some of those use cases. One of the magical things is it has a ton of power built into it, and this is the most simple use case. It's ridiculous. You simply wrap it around the content that you want to be scrollable, and it works. And by works, I don't simply mean that your content is scrollable. It's scrollable in a way that is at home in a native application, meaning that it has things like bounce for iOS, it has resistance, it has acceleration, all the things native users have come to expect right out of the box, which is really incredible. Another thing that's really awesome about the scroll view that you can see in our demo here is as you're scrolling, this is showing some of the acceleration and deacceleration and bounce, but also if a user scrolls over a touchable area like the button we created, it will actually notice that there is a scroll event occurring and not fire the callback on that button and actually allow the scroll view to be the recipient of those events, which is pretty cool. You don't even have to do anything to make that logic happen, it just works. Another really cool thing about scroll views is anybody who's worked in the web has probably picked up a carousel at some point, maybe Ken Wheeler's at one point, Slick Slider. But with React Native, you can make your own carousel really easily. You don't reach for a third-party plugin. Make your own in 10 lines, a few props, and you're there. So scroll views can be made horizontal by passing in a horizontal prop. Paging enabled is really great. What this does is paginate your scroll view based on the width or height, depending on which axis you're moving in. And also, again, has resistance and the ability for those slides to snap into place. A few other things to point out about scroll view. One that's really proved helpful as we have added animations to scroll events is the ability to throttle your scroll view. This is the number of times that it'll fire the scroll event or the on-scroll event. And if you ever are using scroll view and triggering animations based on a scroll position and you find yourself dropping frames, this is a good place to look for optimizing and getting that butter in your animation. Another thing to note about it is you have a callback here on scroll, which fires every time there is a scroll event or at the rate that you've throttled it to. Here we see wizards have a chance to peruse more options of the wizard staff and all the great things that it can do, like light up the Mines of Moria. So, cool. Now Kyle's going to go for a much deeper dive into some of the other gesture tools within React Native, as well as some of our own enhancements.
Yep, you may have been wondering if I was actually going to speak, and yeah, I get to speak now. So this is Pan Responder, and it's a really powerful tool. It's great. You'll notice the gestures are pretty darn similar to scroll view. You have your flicking, your pinching, multi-touch, rotation if you want. But the big distinction here is that Pan Responder is specific to a single item, whereas scroll view is more the container that may or may not have multiple items in it. So we are going to go through the canonical Hello World drag example where we simply press down on something, move it, lift up, press down, continue moving it. That's just the one you'll probably Google for. And this is it. This is a Pan Responder, and yeah, for sure, it's really kind of intimidating. It's not nearly as friendly as the touchables that we just looked at. For one, it's not a component. So we're not using it in our render here. It's a class that has a create function, and then we pass in these parameters, and then we'll end up using the result of that in the render. I guess I need water. But we also wanted to show you that it has these lifecycle hooks, very similar to React when you first learned it. It had these lifecycle hooks that you could leverage. It offers that for the event, and more specifically, how to coordinate between responders. But for the most part, we really do just use 4 of them. The one at the top is to signal, yes, I care about this on press. Let me receive these events and let me use them. And then the bottom 3 are actually using the values of where your gesture is in place. I also wanted to point out that gesture state comes in as a parameter, and it's an object that Pan Responder gives us with things like the delta x, delta y, velocity, how many active touches there are. So it's really powerful and just really convenient. Let me grab some water because my voice is cracking. All right, so I'm going to breeze through this just a little bit and then come back to it and trying to not look at too much code. But I wanted to point out that for this simple drag, we start with an animated value. Not going to go into animated. That's a whole talk on its own. It's maybe even a whole conference. It's a really powerful tool, but we use it, and then we create our Pan Responder in our constructor at the onset, use those 3 functions that we talked about, and I'll come back to this in a second. But with that Pan Responder object, we end up spreading it into our animated view. This is in the render, so we're using spread that Ben talked about. And this basically enhances it with these capabilities. And then we apply the animated value to the style of that animated view to move it. So really quickly, let's look at that previous code with the movie going. When I press down on that puff of smoke, it fires the onMove should set pan responder. We return true, saying, yes, I care about this. I want to receive these events and use them. When that grant happens, I initialize some things for the animated value. As I move it, I'm changing the animated value, and release is kind of the cleanup and allows me to press later. But I won't go into all those details. That's just the good starting example. So cool, we have these three pieces, these three tools to build gestures. Let's show off an actual useful example, right? And so before I show the next video, this is going to be the detail page that has the nice gestures using all three of them. And to paint the picture just a little bit before the video plays, because I'll lose my place, we have essentially two layers going on. We'll have the background layer with the image. Then we'll have a scroll view kind of peeking at the bottom here. And we'll be using the pan responder to drag that scroll view up and even flick it to finish the animation to kind of snap up here. You can drag it down to collapse it. It has touchable without feedback, so if you press, it'll fly up, press, it'll fly down. And then when it is expanded, it takes over as a scroll view, it activates, and then it uses your scroll motions to scroll that within and have the bounce going.
And a little context of why would we go through all this trouble of interfacing all these different gestures is what this allows is the ability to dip into more details about a product without having to context switch, which is what you typically see if you're in a press-only model. You see the product, you press something, you're brought to a detail page, and then you need to go backwards in navigation. Here we're able to jump into that detail experience with a simple swipe up and not having to even tap in or change context.
Right. Also wanted to point out that as we're dragging up, we're monitoring the values of that pan responder, and we're changing the arrow rotation to give the user more context of what's going on, just give it a little bit more of a nice feel. So this is a nice experience for the user. We're definitely happy with that. But I realized that we basically just did this to you. We showed you all the really simple ones, step one, step two, the advanced thing, and we're just kind of hiding the details there. And that's kind of on purpose. I don't want to just go through all that code. There actually is a lot of code. We used those three things, but we used it in very specific ways, and there's a lot of code. So saving you the step of having to go through it with me, we just want to show you that it's possible, it's great, it does work very well, and fortunately, we do have a really great community now. I mean, look around, we're blowing up as a React Native community. So I did want to give a shout out to BrownieFed and Yannick. If you're in the audience, you don't need to stand or anything. But we have used your articles a lot. Yannick has saved us on so many projects when we're reaching the limit of animations. And he just pulls through a PR, and then we get to ship it, and the client's super happy. So thank you, and check those out. Yeah, seriously, that's worth it. Yep. Cool, so thank you. I encourage you to check those out. We can talk more about this afterwards if you want. All right, so now I get to talk a little bit nerdy here, so this is cool. So what if I told you that we had gone through all of those examples without a single touchable and without a single pan responder? Do you know how I do it? And my voice is still cracking. Do you know how I do it? Well, follow me down the rabbit hole. And yes, I know this is a terrible, terrible image, but I couldn't theme rabbit hole with wizard, so I went with wizard, magic, bunny, rabbit, and this is the only image Thomas let me put in. Okay, so we mentioned we're prototypers. We value iterating quickly as possible, in fact. And so we really focus on speed, and not to be confused with velocity. Velocity in a product company would have hopefully one direction. You want to keep pushing towards that direction. With us as prototypers, we really are going all over the map in so many different directions because we are throwing away code. We are experimenting with things, seeing where they break, seeing where they succeed, and moving on to the next thing. So with that in mind, we like to optimize and reduce friction as much as possible. And one friction point for us early on was using touchables. They are great APIs, they're very clear, they're single purpose, there's nothing wrong with them at all. But for us to refactor from a touchable without feedback to opacity to highlight at the end in rapid succession means we need to change our imports, and we need to worry about how many children we have passed into it, whether it's one or we can have an array. And so that was just, that was context switching, that was slowing us down, and so it was a pain point for us. So we just decided to fix it. We're developers, we can just make our own component. And all we did was make our own touchable component. And all it does is use those touchables. It's just a wrapper for it that switches based on the prop we pass for press effect. So the first one is touchable without feedback, opacity, highlight, etc. 1 second. So that was great. Cleaned up some of our code. Made it really easy to just change the press effect and move on and pair a program with designers behind us breathing down our necks. But there was still a problem, and that is the API inconsistency between the touchables. And so we still needed to know the implementation detail of those components. We needed to know how many children we could pass in or not. So we went further down in the rabbit hole and ended up in React Native source code. Ooh. This, thank you. This is touchable without feedbacks render, or at least part of it, and then touchable opacities render, or part of it. This was taken yesterday, so hopefully it's still current. But I wanted to highlight these two pieces here. The first being clone element. Touchable without feedback uses clone element, which requires a single child, hence why you can only pass in a single child. That makes sense. Touchable opacity is wrapping your children, and that's why you can pass it in an array. So that was cool. We learned from that, and we decided, sure, we can do the same as what touchable opacity does. We can just wrap our touchable with a view always, and know that we can pass an array and cognitive overload over, we can just move on. We have a consistent API between our touchables. And to be fair, there is value in having a clone element. So we do have a version of that we use, but I won't go into that for this presentation because it doesn't really matter for that. But there was one more thing, and this was the cool rabbit hole experiment. If you notice towards the bottom, and I'm sorry if it's hard to read, especially in the back, we have these set of props here. And the discovery was, well, that looks really similar to what we saw in PanResponder, right? And it is what we saw in PanResponder, just without the pan. And that was a big discovery for us. We learned that there's really not magic in PanResponder. There's not magic in these touchables. They're just applying props to these layout components like view and image and text has some and some of the other ones. And that's all they're doing. So when you spread a PanResponder, and I always forget that you have the .pan handlers there. I always just spread the PanResponder. When you do that, all it's doing is passing those props into the view, and that's managing the responder events. So that was a big discovery for us. And first of all, it was a little cheesy about we can remove the touchables and PanResponders, but that is how we do it. We can very meticulously craft every single on-responder grant and on-responder move in our slides and pass those into the view, and that's how we do it. But I certainly don't recommend that. Touchable and PanResponder is a really convenient tool, and we absolutely use them. But that was kind of a light bulb moment for us in using this reusable component. We realized that we can actually leverage PanResponder in this touchable and kind of give it more power. So touchable no longer made sense for us. It's doing more than just being a wrapper for touchable components, so we renamed it to interact, because why not? It makes sense. Change the prop to effect, and then we were able to add this pan effect. Pan effect is just using PanResponder into the hood, and that was great. We realized it's all one gesture system. It all makes sense. We can just use this one component for us. So if we look back at the previous, yeah, you don't even need to read it. It's cool. If we look at the previous PanResponder example, again, the API already looks a little bit foreign to me. Every single time I need to use PanResponder, I pretty much Google PanResponder drag example, and I copy and paste, and then I modify some things. And you can see I did that here because I actually messed up the event naming. But with our new interact, we're back into familiar land with components, just like touchable. It's almost the same amount of code, but we can leverage a component that I feel comfortable with. That's what we use all the time, right? And then I can have passing in the props as my class methods. And I can even simplify the naming so I can actually remember it and not have to say, hey, Thomas, did you do the on PanResponder end event motion thing? Yeah. I could just do on end, right? So just clean it up for us. And I'm not saying we're doing crazy things here. It's just allowing us to move faster. That's what we valued from this. So this was also used enough in our code base, the simple drag and lift up and continue dragging, that we didn't want to keep copying and pasting this code essentially. And since we own this component, since Interact is ours, we just brought this up to a top level and made our own drag effect, which does exactly that and just applies it to the child. Same flow. And this also is really nice, very easy to deal with. And that's been a huge win for us in terms of speed, and we've just been able to go way faster because of our own custom little Interact, and it's been a delight to use. I did want to mention one more thing in that this pan responder system that we kind of uncovered, and it's always been existing in React Native's code base, we are not dipping down to that level within Interact. We're still using Touchable, we're still using pan responder. Those are really convenient, great tools. But I think knowing that we can dip down to that level is really valuable. And I think it's possible if we want to pass in an opacity and drag effect, that we might need to merge those methods and inject those directly into the view. We have not done that because we haven't needed to, but it's nice knowing that we can. Mm-hmm. So I just want to have a few final thoughts on this. The first of which is that we do prototype web and native, and we jump back and forth very often, actually. And having a context switch from, okay, I'm in React Native land to web would be significant if it weren't for it being React and React Native and having a declarative programming model. So with this, we were able to bring Interact into the web, have almost the same API, different effects because there are different gestures like hover and click and all that, but it still feels really comfortable to us and allows us to keep moving very quickly. Another is all of those gesture pieces might be changing soon, hopefully soon. React Native gesture handler is in the works from Software Mansion and Expo, and it's looking really promising. Christoph has some great videos posted on YouTube, and I'll let you check those out if you want to see why it's important and what it's going to solve. But I'm really excited to have this level of abstraction because if it does come around and change everything for us, we won't need to refactor our entire code base. Instead, we'll just refactor Interact, and that'll propagate all the changes because we just use Interact, and then we're good. And that's kind of isolated us from the whole JavaScript fatigue thing. So especially on web with CSS and JS, we've gone through like 5 of them delightfully. It hasn't been a problem at all, and that's because we have this level of abstraction that isolates the rest of the code from those changes. Great,
yeah, so hopefully you feel that you've gotten some familiarity with some of the basic gesture tools as well as some of the more advanced ones, and seen from our own experience the value of higher order components to abstract away some of the boilerplate of the pan responder system if it feels too much to remember, which it always is for me. And we'd like to thank you so much for your time, for your attention, and good luck casting gesture spells. So.